Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers on this channel. Today we are going to talk about the latest trailer that has dropped from Amazon related to The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, the most progressive J.R.R. Tolkien adaptation ever, but that's okay because J.R.R. Tolkien, secret progressive. He would be so happy, so proud of this modern adaptation of his story because we all know well and good that J.R.R. Tolkien always thought that progressing into the future would definitely be better for society. He wasn't one of these guys who loved history because he was nostalgic for the past and thought that the world was progressively getting worse. He's all about progress into the future and progressing into the future and progress into the future. And I am so excited for this trailer.
So it's exciting to see that, diversity is being explored in the Rings of Power.
I'm very excited for it. So it's really, really exciting to see.
Very excited to see it.
It just makes me so excited for the next generation. I was still excited.
And so I'm very excited to see how Prime Video takes it.
The sets is all very exciting. And I'm so excited to just see this.
I'm definitely excited to see which is what's so exciting about this.
But before we get into that, before we delve into this trailer, before we do a deep dive, before we sink ourselves in all that is the glory of Amazon's $500 million boondoggle, we have a sponsor for today's video because I don't got Amazon money to pay my bills. So we're going to throw it over to them and then we're going to talk about this on the other side. Get ready for it. You're going to be excited. You're going to love it. Just like all the super fans love this Amazon Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power series. The hype about collagen is in fact real. Recently there was a study with 1,100 participants that showed that supplementing with collagen can reduce some of the most common signs of aging, and this study showed that it becomes really effective after about 90 days. That's not very long, less than 3 months. And what's great about this is it ties in with my sponsor, Health with Justice. This amazing collagen powder is absolutely the best. Not like that crap you get on the store shelves. You put a little scoop of it in the morning, every single morning, and you just watch your wrinkles fade, you watch the glow in your skin return, and it can also help with the appearance of your hair, nails, and your joints and ligaments. It's totally amazing. And what's even more amazing is that despite this powder being the tops, the premium stuff, the stuff that I recommend, it's actually 51% off on my link, healthwithjustice.com. So if you go over there, you can get it for 51% off. And on top of that, we got a 60-day money-back guarantee. So you can put it in your drink every single morning. Decide, you know what? I don't like looking good. I don't like looking sharp. I don't like the wonders of my joints and ligaments. I'm gonna send it back for a full refund. Healthwithjustice.com. That's right, it's healthwithjustice.com.
There was a time when the world was so young. There had not yet been a sunrise. But even then, there was light.
So for all the hubbub surrounding The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power on Amazon, I do have to say that my number one issue with it, and it has always been my number one issue with it, is the fact that all these trailers look incredibly generic. They're cookie cutter. They don't look entertaining. They don't look interesting. They don't look compelling. And they don't look distinctly like Lord of the Rings, which is kind of interesting because these trailers all base themselves on the iconic imagery of Lord of the Rings in order to rope in the fans. However, it just seems like any other fantasy series.
Call to me, lands far away.
But it actually should be a lesson to a major studio like Amazon, who has all this money to throw behind a project like Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, that maybe they should just take a book that nobody's really heard of or has its own following and has never had an adaptation, maybe something written in a bit of a more modern time with more modern themes, and adapt that rather than just trying to cash in on the nostalgia of a J.R.R. Tolkien work. You see, if you're going to make something so generic and remove the things that made it a Tolkien adaptation, then why even bother doing a Tolkien adaptation? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And again, especially when you factor in stuff that we talked about in the past, about Amazon CEO or former Amazon CEO right now, Jeff Bezos, talking about how he wants this to be more like Game of Thrones and have more sex and fighting and political intrigue, etc., etc. Why not just adapt some of the fantasy books that have come out post the HBO Game of Thrones series and try to make that the next Game of Thrones rather than making something that clearly inspired part of Game of Thrones the next Game of Thrones? It's this weird, unusual thing. I don't like it very much. I think it's very not good, and I don't like it. I don't got no good here. Let's roll into the next part of the trailer.
Elves have forests to protect. Dwarfs their mines. Men their fields of grain.
Now, the next thing that I will say, and by the way, this goes into what I was bringing up previously in my other talks about Lord of the Rings and the teaser that they released before, is that everything looks better. And this, by the way, is something that we have to come to expect whenever we watch something that comes out a year out from the work's actual release date. And that's the fact that the CGI and all the computer animators actually need more time to render the effects. So oftentimes stuff looks better closer to release than previous. So on the one hand, on a technical level, it does look like an interesting and compelling show. But on the other hand, The Hobbit had better CGI technology throughout the series of their movies, and the orcs look worse because they use CGI rather than the makeup and the effects from the original trilogy, thus making it look worse. So while the vistas and all this stuff does look better, when we get to the creatures, it's probably not going to look as good as the original Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings adaptation, because due to the limits of technology, they had to craft a lot of that stuff in the real world to thus make it look better. And by the way, the same thing is true for the original Star Wars trilogy. A lot of the aliens, since they had to actually be made, looked way better than they did in the prequels, where they just tried to do everything on a computer. And I think this is the lesson that studios, especially ones willing to spend $500 million on a single season of television, should probably take into account when crafting these narratives. Use the CG for the stuff that you can't really do, or to enhance stuff in your sets, but have some real basis for it, and we as an audience will thank you better. So while it does look better, and the CG does look more amazing in this trailer than it did the previous teaser, we have to factor in that they're going to be overusing CG for creatures, etc., and that will likely make the show pale in comparison to the visual aesthetic of the original Peter Jackson movies, while maybe possibly being better than the Hobbit movies' visual aesthetic.
But we Harfoots have each other.
For I must now wander.
Now, I also want to point out, and I've said this time and time again, that I'm somebody who's a fan of the movies. I'm somebody who's gotten the books, which, by the way, are read by Andy Serkis on Audible for audiobooks, so I can learn more about the stories from a book standpoint. But I'm not this huge Tolkien fan. I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings person. I'm not somebody who read the books when I was in high school or anything like that, so I don't have the strong ties to the material that some of the people out there in my audience and some of the people leaving comments on this trailer actually do. I have a somewhat more than the average person's knowledge of it as somebody who's seen the movies and has read through most of the first book, but is going through them on audiobook right now as we speak. That being said, I did find out this whole thing with the Harfoots. I thought it was a sort of like a no rights to the Hobbits thing because Amazon bought the rights to the Silmarillion rather than the actual Tolkien library, and therefore they couldn't use Hobbits. But it appears that the reason they're using this like subspecies or similar species to the Hobbits, again, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, like I said, I'm not a diehard, I'm just a tryhard, was because they actually didn't really have hobbits do anything notable in this age at this period of time in the Tolkien universe. So if we're going to ding them for their lack of ability and lack of willingness to adapt Tolkien's work true to the source material, then I'm going to give them a bit of credit for having to have hobbits in here from a marketing standpoint, but not actually having legit hobbits in here because according to the source material, they're not available. I think you got to give credit where credit is due, even when this clearly looks like a bastardization of Tolkien's work in almost every other regard.
You have fought long enough, Galadriel. Put up your sword.
Now, I didn't know this because, again, not the biggest rememberer of all the Tolkien stuff, but this guy is Hugo Weaving's character from the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. You know, the guy that's basically in charge of all the elves, who's a big, strong guy in the Peter Jackson adaptation, but in this one, they got one of the skinniest, weakest looking guys, and of course, he's going up to my girl Galadriel.
I've seen a lot of talking about my girl Galadriel.
Yes.
And telling her she needs to put down her sword because the fighting is over, there's nothing to worry about, all conflict is done, and we all know well and good that this person is a dumb idiot because he's a man and he just didn't listen enough to Galadriel.
The enemy is still out there. question now is where?
Now, if I remember correctly, Galadriel was the chick that was easily corrupted by the ring. And by the way, that's not a knock against her. One of the reasons why the hobbits had to have the ring is because they were lower on the scale of species in Tolkien's universe, so it was actually safer for them to have it. It's one of the reasons why Gandalf feared the ring and all that. But yeah, now she's somebody's just proven to be 100% right and accurate, and she knows everything that this stupid dumb idiot man doesn't know. What's wrong with her? What a dumb man, idiot, dumb loser, stupid-faced loser, Hugo Weaving. Eat it.
It is over.
You have not seen what I've seen.
I have seen my share.
Now, my original reaction to this conversation was that it was incredibly generic and embarrassingly so, and I was going to talk to you about the lessons that we learned from Game of Thrones Season 8, and Game of Thrones Season 7 to a lesser extent, and Season 6 to a lesser extent, and Season 5 to a lesser extent, which is, even if you amp up the spectacle, even if everything never looked better visually, if your writing isn't there,
It is over.
You have not seen what I've seen.
I have seen my share.
and this horrible, embarrassing dialogue between those two characters seems like it's placeholder, cliche, generic action movie nonsense, and it just goes to show you that the writing for this show does not appear to be there. Now, of course, the product could come out, and it could be amazing, and I call it a product because it's being produced by Amazon, and it's definitely a product of our time, not a product of Tolkien's work, and I could be totally proven wrong. I leave the possibility open because that's what a great guy that I am. But what you guys out there in the audience have actually pointed out to me is that these characters are thousands of years old. One of them's 5,000 years old, or there's about at the time of the story, and if I'm wrong, again, correct me, it's fine, it's not a big deal. Like I said, I'm not the Tolkien expert, I'm not a Tolkien scholar, how that's a thing out there in the world like the rest of you nerds, but whatever. And these characters have had a bunch of conversations, many interactions, so the idea that they would have this pissing contest like they're two regular humans, this seems like a conflict for the realms of man, and them being elves is absurd in every possible way. So it's just corny, and we all know from watching this that it's going to prove out that Galadriel, my girl Galadriel,
I've seen it. Got a lot of talking about my girl Galadriel.
is going to be the correct one, because rather than adapting Tolkien's work, what this actually is feminist trash. It's feminist fan fiction about the Lord of the Rings. It's all about disproving your previously held notions, killing it off, because men are bad and whatnot and whatever. It's all about the women, and in the Second Age, when things were better, women ran the show, and they were always right, and they always proved everybody else wrong, because that's what we're writing. We're doing a Tolkien adaptation, whatever. Just go women. We need a girl power message in absolutely everything right now, because why not? Who cares about source material? Who cares about the fans that are built in and invested in a faithful adaptation? Whatever. The girl power.
You have not seen what I have seen.
Also, I don't know if you guys know this, but based on what I'm seeing right here, and even the cheesy, cliche lines of dialogue being presented about how you have not seen what I have seen, what's actually going on in this is something that we've seen, and honestly has become a trope in modern media, which is substituting trauma for character development. What they're doing is portraying Galadriel as somebody who's going through like a post-traumatic stress disorder, and nobody understands what she's going through because they didn't do it, they didn't experience the battlefield, whatever, which is just not that interesting when you see that kind of character type repeated in absolutely every work of art. What people need to understand is that trauma is not character development. Something traumatic happening to you and how you react and how you overcome can lead to character development, but all too often what we end up finding with writing of female characters in modern stories is the fact that they don't want to have them have any flaws, anything to overcome, so they just put a traumatic event in their past, and really their only development is to get back to where they were and prove themselves right and find out that they were the most special all along, which again is just not an interesting and compelling story. It's not compelling morally, there's no real conflict there, and if you want to compare and contrast this to Game of Thrones, look at the character development that actually occurred with the female characters, especially in the first half of that series, and compare it to what's going on in the second half, and you'll see that relying on trauma or just stating that trauma changed me is clearly and obviously, when the writing went terrible, where things went. You can have stories with feminist elements in it, Maybe it shouldn't be The Lord of the Rings, something written by J.R.R. Tolkien based on his ideals and his beliefs, but just do it a little more clever. Just have a little bit more effort. If you're going to bastardize the work, at least make an attempt to make it better in some possible way. I mean, crap, this is embarrassing. Again, I hate the generic text. The legend begins. The new story is coming. And then you cut to the dialogue and it's just as cheesy as this placeholder text. The darkness is emerging again.
Darkness will march over the face of the earth. It will be the end, not just of our people, but all peoples.
It will be the end of not just our people, but all people, blah, blah, generic dialogue, whatever. I guess the lesson is all these people from disparate backgrounds need to come together and work together, maybe even form something like a fellowship so we could learn the same exact lesson from Lord of the Rings, which clearly and obviously Amazon wants the rights to, but we're not able to get. So they're just going to make a second age version of the Lord of the Rings, try to copy paste the same story, throw some feminist gobbledygook all over the screen, and I know I just butchered the pronunciation. I was going to say spelling, the pronunciation of feminist, but throw some feminist gobbledygook on there, and whatever. I'm sure you'll watch it because we put Lord of the Rings on it, and therefore, you're definitely going to be on board if we just put Lord of the Rings on it. On top of that, notice the like to dislike ratio in this video. At the time that I'm recording it, it's about 23,000 likes to 75,000 dislikes. Not really working out, just using this IP. Not really satisfying the audience that you intended on satisfying. Now again, this is why I'm appreciative for the internet, to fill the gaps of my knowledge. I didn't realize this because I just thought this was some random lady. Obviously, it's meant to fill Amazon's diversity quota, but she appears to actually be a queen in an unbroken line of kings, as stated in the original source material. So if I'm going to give credit to them for not trying to use hobbits, despite the fact that they desperately want to use hobbits, and by the way, throughout the course of the series, at some point, they're going to break the rule and bring in actual hobbits, I'm going to have to discredit them for deciding to gender swap one of the unbroken line of kings and replace it with the Black Queen, because we all know what Lord of the Rings really needed was more black women are queen messaging, and that's really what J.R.R. Tolkien secretly wrote in his letters to somebody about whatever. So don't worry, it's a true adaptation and it reflects our modern world. Definitely so much better than sticking to the source material. I mean, why even adapt the source material if you're just going to ignore it and make changes for no other reason except to fill Amazon's diversity quota, not changes to make the art more adaptable to the modern times or make it more adaptable to the different medium, aka the screen. Whatever, I'm sure it's fine. Don't you love the queen? Everybody gets a black queen. That's just the rules of the universe now.
I am sorry, but their time has come.
Also, I definitely love this right here, because here you have the same character that, again, in the original series was like the leader of the elves. He was played by Hugo Weaving, and he's climbing up an ice mountain. And although they don't make the connection in this trailer, if you remember in the other trailer, we have my girl Galadriel.
I've seen it. A lot of talking about my girl Galadriel.
Climbing up this mountain in full armor with a dagger with no problem. And now we're seeing this guy, this blundering idiot who dared question my girl Galadriel.
I've seen a lot of talking about my girl Galadriel.
Yeah. Struggling to climb that mountain. Just yet another way of showing the absolute embarrassing incompetence of men. Even those elf men are embarrassing and horribly incompetent. Wow. Those elf men, terrible in every way. Galadriel gonna save everything, blah, blah, blah.
The past is with us all. The past is dead. We either move forward or we die with it.
The past is dead. We either move forward or we die with it. Now, a lot of people have been comparing this to Kylo Ren's speech to Rey, where it's like, let the past die, kill it if you must, blah, blah, blah. And honestly, I can't help but notice the similarities. Remember, the writer of this has been talking about how they need to make it more similar to the modern day, which of course is the opposite of the intent of Peter Jackson, and obviously the opposite of what J.R.R. Tolkien actually believed. So yeah, this could be just a message to people out there in the audience, even though it's kind of funny because they're going back into the past, not just for the nostalgia of the Peter Jackson movies, but they're actually going to a previous age before the events of the Lord of the Rings book series and the original trilogy took place.
This could be the beginning of a new era.
Now, of course, we close with a bunch of different shots meant to create intrigue. I can't really blame Amazon for doing it this generic. I understand it. This is just the way that modern trailers are cut together. It's like when every single movie poster had that teal and orange contrast on their cover. It's just a thing that became super popular and everybody was doing it, and you don't really notice it unless you pan out. Like, I don't notice it unless I watch a bunch of trailers, which I'm a guy who watches a bunch of trailers, how generic and common it is. The narration, the disparate images cut together, the conversation meant to establish like this or that, but it's one conversation, it's generic, it doesn't really mean much, and maybe even in the context of the show or movie, it's just not going to be as compelling. Sometimes they even change the lines that they use in the show or movie, but yeah, that's really all we get from Amazon's The Lord of the Rings. $500 million to make a fantasy series that is Lord of the Rings in name only, very generic, and again, by a company with enough money and enough advertising budget, if they're going to spend $500 million on the series season 1 itself, that they could have probably adapted a new fantasy thing and made that the new thing. I mean, HBO didn't go look for a piece of Tolkien's work. They adapted a George R.R. Martin fantasy thing into a series, and it became one of the biggest hits in their network's history. And honestly, that's the biggest travesty of this situation. Not that they're bastardizing Tolkien. If you think that people weren't on the verge of ruining everything that already previously existed and was popular, you haven't been paying attention to the trends. The travesty is they're spending all this money and they could make a new thing. We desperately want new things to get into, and yet they refuse to do it. They just don't want to take any risk. They're not into the gambling. It's all established IPs from now until the end of time. We are going to live in the 80s in terms of movies, now and always, always and forever, even to the extent that when people start doing nostalgic movies from today's times, they're actually just going to be nostalgic for the 80s adaptations that we're just doing. The 80s, I'm sick of it. It's lasted so long. I need some different stuff, but 80s and reboots of previous franchise. Come on, invest your money. Invest $100 million instead of $500 million into a new fantasy book series and see how it goes. But hey, you know what? Those are just my thoughts. That's just my opinion. Maybe you guys think this trailer is the tops. Maybe you think it's slamming, it's amazing, it's great, and you're gonna watch every episode backwards and frontwards, forward and back, up and down, out of order and in order because you love it so much. Let me know down in the comments below. If you like this video, show me how to leave a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all the social medias, support me via the support links in the description box. Honestly, whatever. Till next time.